hear a kitty.
I'm going to go on mute.
I heard a kitty. Well, I fed my dogs. I hate to say it. Yeah, I bribed my dogs with food so they'll sleep.
Mine just woke up. Now, oh, Darian, are we broadcasting?
I think we should be.
All right. So Jen, take us away.
Well, hang on, let's make sure anyone in the chat. I'm just looking at Pathable.
All right, I'm hearing from Akeisha that we are in.
Okay, so Devin, you're doing the intros, or I got them up.
Hi, sure, yeah, I can do the intro. Welcome, everyone. This is session H1, Equitable Family School Collaboration in PBIS, and I am here with Jen, Rose, Teresa, and Amirski, and they'll be the presenters for today. And I'm sure many of you have been participating in sessions and these look familiar to you. We just ask that you engage with us today through some polls, and Jen will reference those polls when you should be responding to them. They're in the beginning of her session, so she'll prompt you for that. There's also a place in Pathable to engage in chat, and we encourage that. And I think, you know, the more that you can engage with the content and with each other, it will be helpful too.
We're gonna troubleshooting that since it does seem to be a wider issue. If you can just hang on for 1 sec.
And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Pathable and able to kind of navigate that system by now. If you have trouble, these slides are in the file section of Pathable and you can reference them for assistance. All right. And this session is the first one within the family and student voice strand. Following this, we'll be talking about using family data to inform homeschool communication and collaboration in session H2. And then we'll end out the day using PBIS during the COVID-19 outbreak to facilitate improved homeschool support for integrated mental health and academics. Some great presenters this afternoon. We encourage you to think about these 5 questions as you're listening today and working with your team on next steps. And I will hand it off to Jen. Anything else?
All right. Okay, hello everyone. It's so good to see you, if only virtually. My name is Jennifer Rose, and I am a school psychologist by training. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist. I work with Loyola University Chicago in a small community mental health clinic. Previous to that, I worked for what was formerly known as Illinois PBIS Network, doing a lot of work at tier 2 and tier 3 with schools and families. The big focus of my work now is actually working again with families, more directly with supporting their kids relative to mental health concerns. When Therese gets to her section, she's going to give a bit of an introduction too, but it's a pleasure to be working with Therese today. And I am so excited to hear her section as she's going to be sharing with us today some strategies about how we can facilitate equitable family school collaboration in PBIS. So I'm going to be providing you with some background information about collaboration and equity in terms of family school relationships. And more specifically, what I'm going to be doing is talking about the relationship between PBIS and culturally responsive practice. And I'll talk also about the relationship between family and youth voice and culturally responsive tier one, PBIS implementation. And then Teresa will talk more about strategies to recruit and integrate family and youth voice and identifying steps for initiating focus groups to address disproportionate discipline. Okay, so we've got some chats up here and I'm gonna have slides. You're gonna see some slides periodically in here so that we can encourage you guys to remember to engage in the poll questions. I know this isn't quite the same as us being face-to-face, but the polls are a way for us as your presenters to get a sense of how you're tracking with what we're talking about. So the first question is for you, how is your school or your district providing instruction? How is that affecting you in terms of your interactions with your students and your families? Okay. Then there is another poll question about homework requirements for your district and school. And what supports does your district or school provide for working families? Okay. There's been a lot of discussion around what schools and schooling looks like in the age of COVID. Things have definitely changed. It's definitely changed, I think, for everyone, ranging from the administrators to teachers to parents who are now teaching and working and doing 5 million other things. It has definitely changed the dynamics in terms of what we do in schools and with education. So that piece about interaction and support has taken on a new heightened level of sensitivity and importance, given the new structures that have been forced upon us by coronavirus. So let's talk a little bit about culture. So what does culture have to do with families and schools? Well, oftentimes when I'm facilitating a group or a workshop, people will ask the question, well, we just can't get parent involvement. We just can't get parents to get involved. And the thing about it is that parents are always involved. The question is, are they being involved the way that schools associate parent involvement? So this quote here is meant to kind of spark some curiosity and some exploration on your end in terms of what it might look like if youth and family and community really truly felt involved in the school and that their culture was actually being represented. Because if people get a sense of their voice is actually going to be heard, that their culture is recognized and respected and integrated, then you see transformative behavior that starts to look like, I think, involvement. All right, so the work on the section that I'm going to be sharing with you is coming from the PBIS Culturally Responsive Field Guide. In the handout, there is a click link to this resource. I encourage you to review it if you have not done so already, because there are many tips and strategies in here for incorporating or recognizing culture and working actively with your staff and with families around the issue of integrating culture. So again, here is another piece of information. Again, why are we talking about cultural responsiveness? When we think about school-wide PBIS, cultural responsiveness is one of the key elements of school-wide PBIS, meaning that, how PBIS implementation looks in your school or district, it's going to look vastly different than another school and district because of all of the different factors that make your particular school or district different. And that is all rooted in the culture of your district. Even if it's homogeneous in terms of race and ethnicity, every school, every district has its own culture. Okay, so people ask the question, well, what is this cultural responsiveness thing? What does it mean to be culturally responsive? Well, the way that we define it in terms of cultural responsiveness is that we're going to hold high expectations for everyone, while using their cultures and their own unique experiences to enhance their learning. We know that when kids are engaged in school, when they feel a connection with the adults in the building, then they're going to show up and they're going to try to give you their best each day. Okay, and one of the ways we motivate and encourage that engagement is through engagement and recognition of their culture. Okay. So then we talk about equity. So when we talk about equity, this is the idea of of adapting our culture, our education, our instruction, our environment, so that we are providing equitable educational opportunities that people can see themselves represented. And this is across people of different languages, races, disability status, or I call ability status, gender, sexual orientation. All of those factors have to do with access to education. And when you see yourself in the environment, then you feel that you actually belong in the environment. I think we've seen this particular picture 1,000 times, but I think it just stares to just remind ourselves about this issue about equality versus equity. And I've seen variations of this where the fence is not even there. So it's again, this idea of what do we need to do to help people become part of the game? Some people are kind of born with, just, certain advantages to be able to access the playing field. And then other people are going to need, because of circumstances, because of societal issues, what have you, we're going to need to make some adjustments so that those people can have the same kind of access as people who are born into situations where they naturally have access to certain resources. So this brings us full circle to the comment that I was making earlier about the impact of the coronavirus on education. I remember seeing this tweet. It was actually a tweet, and then it was posted on Instagram about kids actually sitting outside of a Taco Bell so that they could have access to the internet, so they could have access to schooling. What coronavirus has done has laid bare the inequities that that people experience in schooling in terms of access. And in this case, it has to do with access to technology, to resources. Do you have internet? Does your internet have sufficient speed, bandwidth? What if there are multiple kids in the house? How does that affect your ability to access the internet? What do all kids have access to a Chromebook, a laptop? What if your district is poor and can't provide those kind of Chromebooks? Then how do those kids learn? So this starts adding on a multiplier effect of who is able to continue to access education during the coronavirus epidemic. One fact that I identified came and was just stunning to me. The fact that we had anywhere, between 15 to 16 million kids, who don't have adequate internet or computer devices to access the internet so that they can continue to do the remote learning. In my own home district of Chicago Public Schools, that was one of the first steps that the school district had to do in order to implement remote learning, was to do setups where they could literally distribute Chromebooks to students. And then also developing partnerships with internet providers so that, people in household incomes under a certain amount were able to access the internet. And that's only the first step. So again, this is talking about who has access, because we don't want to look up a year, 2, 3 years after this pandemic has eventually resolved itself and find out that we have further disadvantaged of people who were already disadvantaged because they could not access the internet. They could not access the technology they needed in order to continue schooling. And oh, by the way, there's also 400,000 teachers, the people who are trained to provide the instruction, who cannot access the internet or have inadequate internet issues. I don't know about you, but yesterday I had some issues with the internet and I was going just crazy because that's your lifeline. Not to mention that I had to do a session yesterday, and if I hadn't been able to access the internet, then oh well, my co-presenters would have been, I guess, doing my slides. But think about that in a more urgent situation of I've got to teach kids, but my internet's not good. So that's an issue. So then this brings us to the issue of how do we change the systems? So it's about how we think about equity with families, okay, and with students. There's 2 forms or characteristics of systems change. One is the technical changes. Okay, so this could be, okay, these are our rules that we're going to have, and this is what we're going to do to make sure that, say, in the case of access to technology, that this is going to happen. That all students in schools with with students with X amount of income are going to have access to Chromebooks, and they're going to have access to free internet. So that's a technical change. Those are rules. The adaptive changes are the deeper intrinsic changes that occur at an individual level, where we become imbued with this sense that, hey, everyone should have access. Okay, everyone should have access to schooling. And what is it that we need to do in order for that to happen? And that becomes a belief system that goes beyond a policy or what's been dictated to you to keep your job. Okay, so this is just a short list of variables over which the school has control. They've been designated into the technical area and the adaptive area. And I find the areas that people struggle with the most are the adaptive areas. So these are the ones that are tied into implicit biases that we have about who can learn, what family involvement should look like, what does it mean to be a good parent. All of those types of things are the things that we have to do the inner deeper work about, okay, that feeds into whether or not we're having truly collaborative family and school relationships. But another way to think about it is we can set the policies that can encourage or facilitate people moving towards some of these adaptive changes. So in systems change, what we want ideally is for our teams, our PBIS teams, to actively seek feedback from stakeholders, the students, the families, and the community. So when we are developing interventions, when we're developing our matrices, when we're doing anything that impacts students and families, that these people have a voice at the table, they know that their voice carries weight and that it does matter. They're going to be heard. So they're not secondary to staff. So that's when we're talking about actively changing the system, okay? And so this speaks to the connection between cultural responsiveness and voice. Who has a voice at the table? Okay, I think about the quote from Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman to mount a campaign for presidency. And her quote was, hey, if they don't provide you with a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that folks have a seat at the table so they don't feel like they got to bring in a folding chair, a lawn chair, that they know that they have a spot there and that their voice is welcomed, encouraged, and affirmed. So again, here's something for you guys to think about. When we traditionally think about family engagement, there's two ways of kind of thinking about it. Okay, so parents, I said earlier, are always engaged. They're engaged from the standpoint that they're providing the shelter, the support, the love, the nurturance, so that your kid, when a kid comes to school, that they are emotionally available for learning, because that's important. Because if you're stressed out, you're hungry, you don't have adequate clothing, you don't feel loved, affirmed, supported at home, then your mind is going to be going in 5 dozen different directions, and school is not going to be one of the directions it's going to be headed in. So that's one way that parents can show that they are engaged and they are supporting their child's schooling. However, schools look at it as, okay, what you're not being a room mom, what you're not coming to PTA night, or I never see this parent here, there, wherever. Okay, so prior to becoming a school psychologist, I taught for 9 years in Chicago public schools, and I worked in an area that was a mixed community of Latino parents and African-American parents. And a lot of these parents did shift work at factories. So they could not be available at all the times. But that does not mean that they didn't care about their kids or they weren't involved. So that's a way to think about it. So sometimes we have to rethink as the educators, what are other ways that we can involve parents and give them opportunities to have a voice? Okay, so here are a couple more poll questions for you. Make sure you've checked this out. Hopefully they're up there. How has family school collaboration in your district changed since the onset of pandemic? You may actually find that you're having more interaction with your parents because, guess what? Now that they're teaching their kids or they're more actively involved in doing the distance learning, there may be more questions and more active involvement from that standpoint. So just curious to know. One other question is, what strategies has your school used to collaborate with families during the pandemic? Okay, what are some things that you've done to kind of up your game in terms of engagement? Okay, so again, this idea of including families as full partners and the significance of doing that with underserved families and cultures, so that if the parents' experience in school was exclusionary and unpleasant, we want to redouble and triple or quadruple our efforts to make sure that we can help to eradicate that unpleasant memory and to encourage their current engagement in school. Okay. What does that mean? So meaningful inclusion of family voice means that we want to hear about how their culture influences parenting, the expectations for their kids. And that when we do that, when we're developing our matrices, behavioral expectations, teaching plans for behaviors, that the family has a voice in that so that we understand where they're coming from and they understand where we're coming from. It's a collaboration and a negotiation. It's not a dictate. Okay. These are a couple of resources that are included in the PowerPoint in terms of things that you can do to help address some of the concerns that you may be experiencing. I referenced a couple times about the digital divide, and here's some reference to that. And then let's not forget our rural districts. We speak a lot about urban schools and schools in, large populated communities, but let's also think about how all of this, with the COVID, has impacted our rural districts. How has that impacted learning? How does that impact family engagement? So there's some resources for you along those lines. So again, it's good seeing you all, if only virtually. And I'll be available for questions at the end of the presentation. And now I'm going to turn things over to Reese, who's going to share with you some great ideas in terms of actually implementing some of this family engagement. Okay, I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Rose. I so enjoyed hearing you present. I want to apologize on behalf of the forum for the problems accessing the session today. They are actively working on getting people into the session. And on our side, we're seeing people trickle in very slowly. So if you were having trouble before and you made it in, welcome. We're so glad to have you. If you're still trying to get in, you're not hearing me right now, but hopefully our support team is chatting with you to let you know what's going on. My name is Therese Sandomierski. I'm a technical assistance specialist with the Florida PBIS project out of the University of South Florida, which is ironically in Tampa, Florida, which is more in the middle of the state. But that kind of jives with how I do things in my life in general. So even though we're not southern Florida, we're more central Florida. We're at USF, University of South Florida. Clear as mud. It's just going to get better from here, y'all. All right, so let me jump in. The information I'm going to share with you this afternoon now, if you're on the East Coast, is part of our overall process for doing root cause analysis with individual schools. We've completed this process at the time that I pulled these slides together. We completed it with about 27 schools in 6 different districts, and that number is growing pretty much constantly. So that's always increasing. Getting family input on disproportionate discipline You see it's right there, number 3 in our process, and you have a copy of this in the session handouts. But it occurs very early in our process, and our goal for our schools is that the school teams continue to work with families and students as they address disproportionate discipline. So I'm going to be sharing some of the lessons learned and some of the things we've been seeing, as well as some strategies that our schools are using for really incorporating family and student voice into what they're doing with PBIS to address disproportionate discipline. So I'm going to be calling on our content facilitator, Dr. Devin Minch, to help me out with reading the chat responses. But if folks who are in our session right now, if you could type into the chat, in what ways does your school currently involve families in Tier 1 PBIS? So go ahead, just type into that chat box, start sharing some ideas about how you do that. Some ideas to kind of get those neurons firing. We hear from schools very frequently that they involve families by doing notifications about different Tier 1 activities, offering reminders about what the Tier 1 expectations are, sometimes offering suggestions or tips for using PBIS at home, and also to solicit volunteers at a planned event. Dr. Minch, I'm wondering, have we had some other ideas that have been shared in the chat?
Folks are saying that they're putting stuff, information in the handbook. They're encouraging PBS to be used at home. They're including family members on the PBIS teams and community gatherings, parent surveys, brochures, positive parent emails.
Nice. A couple of those are really standing out to me. Having parents on the PBIS team, that sounds like a really big way to get active parent involvement in Tier 1 PBIS. I love those positive emails home. Those are such a good strategy for a number of different reasons. But a lot of the strategies I'm hearing is a lot of what we hear from our schools here in Florida. And a lot of that is one-way communication from the school about Tier 1 to their families and students. So let me ask the group, go ahead and type into chat. In the majority of the examples that we've shared here, who decides what PBIS looks like at the school? And Dr. Minch, if you can help me out with the chat.
Sure. Family members that are on the team are having a say. Students are deciding along with staff. There's a lot of comments about data helping to decide. The PBS team, which includes teachers, administrators, students, and families. The PBS team with input from others. Let's see, the principal and the PBS committee are coming in fast.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's part of having a very full session right now. Yeah, and actually in the schools that we work with in Florida, the PBIS team is the answer that comes up most frequently. We don't get to see a ton of examples where family members are included as members of that Tier 1 PBIS team. Many times it's really that one-way from school to family communication. But yeah, the answer we hear most frequently is that the PBIS teams are the ones who get to decide what PBIS looks like at their school. And that's a good way to ensure that the PBIS system, even if you're using your data, it's a good way to ensure that your PBIS system will work for the PBIS team members, right? We want to increase representation and authentic collaboration with the people who are supposed to benefit from our system. And if you're thinking about equity and disproportionate discipline, and you're thinking about including people on your team and including people in decision-making about what Tier 1 PBIS looks like, you want to have a very specific focus on families who are impacted by disproportionate discipline. We hear from many of our schools that it's difficult to engage with families whose children are overrepresented in discipline. And we have some strategies actually to help get around that. So most frequently, the type of barriers that our schools run into in getting more family collaboration at tier one. Effective communication is always mentioned as a barrier. So it's very hard in quotes, to get a hold of families that they want to participate in decision making. Logistics can be an issue. A lot of families work during school hours, and so they can't leave work to participate in decision making at the school. In some cases, there are pre-existing relationships with school staff that are not very positive. And so some family members do not want to engage with the school because of those pre-existing relationships. And then another piece is also a lot of families, and I would say probably the vast majority, if not all families, they have, if you think about this in behavioral terms, they have a history of top-down decision making when it comes to having a say in what goes on at the school. Usually it's the school that picks the curriculum, that decides on instruction, that makes decisions about discipline infractions and what types of consequences to use. So families don't have a history of having a voice in what the school is doing for family collaboration, or in tier one PBIS, excuse me. So really the first step in getting families involved to address equity within the school is really to set up that foundation to support what you want to do. It really boils down to these big three ideas, at least in my mind. The first there is getting to know your families and your students, and getting to know them on more than just a superficial level. So actually authentically building those positive relationships. Also increasing positive connections with our families. And if we're thinking about disproportionate discipline, then we're really thinking specifically about increasing positive connections with families who are impacted by disproportionate discipline. So if you're doing those two things, then you'll be getting the information to help you prioritize family and student needs, and making sure that what you're doing to support all students is also supporting the families who really do need it the most. So before you can really engage with families, it helps if you know the best way to communicate with them. And so what I'm sharing here, it's a handout that's available in the file share section of the session. This was developed actually by Dr. Minch, our content facilitator. And this is just a very simple, straightforward communication survey. This does not have all the potential fields that you would want to include on your survey. This is just an example of the types of questions you could ask. So for example, what are your preferred contact methods, your preferred frequency, preferred languages, preferred times, finding that out about your families. One thing though, if you're concerned about equity in your school environment, you want to make sure that you are including demographics on your surveys. Because it may very well be that overall for your school, families have certain preferences that emerge as the most common preferences. But your job, if you're interested in equity, is to break down those preferences by demographic group, by group of concern, so that you can see for the groups that we are concerned about supporting, what are their preferences and are we using those preferences? So I want to kind of have you guys type into chat. So we're talking when this particular resource was developed, this was pre-pandemic, right? So we're still talking about students showing up to school and just the old-fashioned way. But now that the pandemic hit, could some folks start sharing through chat? What impact has the pandemic had on the frequency, forms, and content of your communications with family members? And Dr. Minch, if you don't mind helping me out with those responses, I'd appreciate that.
I think there's a couple comments about the handout they would like to hand out, and I was I said maybe we could add it to the file pod following the session.
Yep, the handout was actually embedded in there. So if you go to the file pod and you download the handout for this session, there are a lot, because I included full page copies of each one of these slides. And if you just keep scrolling on down, you'll see this as a handout in that packet.
Kent shared a family survey that they are field testing, which I think would be something great for us to take a look at. We'll try to add that to the file pod too. I know the comments are moving in fast and people might have missed that. District-wide, they use Parent Square. I think that's probably an app or a website for communication, positive responses from families overall. I think that's a big one. How is whatever you're using working for families and making sure you're staying in touch with that? That's huge.
Absolutely.
School calendar
Excellent.
has
Oh, go
leading.
ahead.
They're just trying to share some of the highlights, but they keep changing. The frequency is less right now because of the pandemic. Some folks are using Classojo, Schoolology, Remind, and they're saying that right now, given the context, there seems to be a potential for more equitable engagement given the virtual connections, allowing for more personalized communication to families based on their preferences.
And I so love that observation. As long as we can ensure access to internet, right? So if we can ensure equitable access to internet, then absolutely there is a potential for more individualized communication. The focus groups that I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes here, we actually did those virtually since the pandemic started, and there wasn't a huge difference between the virtual versus the face-to-face in-person version of the focus groups. So yes, there is an opportunity for that. So I appreciate you guys sharing that. If as you're participating and you're reading the chat comments, if someone mentions a strategy and you'd like more information on it, feel free to chat with one another or to leave questions in that chat pod. And then we can kind of help each other out with the different resources that are out there. Now, the families that I've been talking to since the pandemic started is that with virtual instruction, and this is really, really intense at the secondary level, so middle and high schools, is families are getting overwhelmed with the amount of communication that's coming from the school, because the school's communicating assignments, they're communicating help information for using different platforms. They have several different platforms that they're using for different types of things. And many of the families I've spoken with are just overwhelmed by that. It's a lot for them to manage because they're also still trying to survive the pandemic right along with us. This might be a particularly good time to reach out to your families to identify what their preferences are for communication. And those surveys are a great way of doing that efficiently and getting the data back in a way that your team can use it right away. Some other strategies that I've heard, having a daily digest instead of individual emails from every one of the students' teachers, offering weekly to-do lists, having standard office hours available if a student needs help, and then also following up more personally, more individually through a phone call or even a postcard home. So that's how we can think about ways of improving family communication during the pandemic. If you guys have additional ideas, please go ahead and type those into the chat as well. So something else to think about as students come back to school, because at some point they will all come back to school, is to think about just look around your school and look at your policies and think about the extent to which your school projects a welcoming environment for all families, for all students. There has been some debate going on within my own state and in another state that I work with regularly about having parent dress codes, requiring parents to dress a certain way when they come to campus. There was a particular headline grabbing story in one state where a parent came in a t-shirt dress and her hair was in a bonnet, and she wanted to enroll her her 6-year-old in school, and the school turned her away because of how she was dressed. Depending where you fall on the spectrum of supporting dress codes or being against dress codes, this is a debatable issue that's out there. My question though, in terms of ensuring equity in your school and in terms of promoting authentic engagement from all of your families. So you want to make sure that, in addition to your deliberate communications, if your more background implicit communications are also projecting a sense of welcoming for all types of families and all types of students. My own personal feeling is having a parent dress code would potentially work against that, but I'm certain that that would spark some debate if there's not already some debate going on in the chat pod. but also looking around beyond your policies, looking at the physical environment for your school. Is the language that you're using for your expectations, is that inclusive of all of the families that attend your school? The physical environment, are we using language and themes that are important to the community? Are portrayals of students and of staff members, are they portrayed in a way that is reflective of your community? And if you really think about this, this can extend all the way to district and school hiring practices, right? So this can have some potentially far-reaching consequences. But the overall message I want you guys to take from this particular slide is thinking in terms of your environment and your policies and your hiring decisions. Are you projecting your communication in such a way that others would feel welcome? Now, in the pandemic world, this is yet something else to think about, right? Is to what extent our virtual practices project a welcoming environment. So I'm going to give you guys just a second here to look at those online classroom rules. I don't know where I got those from. I think it was a Google search, but there were some things that were cute about this that I wanted to share. Like there's a little smiley face pencil in a corner, a smiley face apple in another corner. So it feels very happy and positive. But I want to ask folks, do you see anything problematic in these online classroom rules? And Dr. Minch, do you mind helping me with the comments?
Sure thing. So far, we haven't had kids. There's a question of why no virtual backgrounds are allowed. Someone pointed out being remain seated might be a problem. They're very rigid, and not everyone has a privilege of a quiet environment. Some students may not want people to see their homes.
Yes.
They're not culturally responsive. And another PBS expert, lots of no's, telling them what not to do.
Right. At least they had a couple of kind of broader, positively stated things in there. So I figured this would be a good example to share. I appreciate those comments. And actually, when Dr. Rose was presenting, we had a participant share an experience in Puerto Rico where families sometimes just have one device and it has to be shared across multiple children. So many of these things just aren't possible for some of our families. And so if this is the case, you know, then our virtual expectations are not necessarily working for all of our families either. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, once you're communicating more effectively with your families, the next step then is to think about how to engage with them, what strategies to use to engage with them, thinking about that in a multi-tiered approach. And this is also something I want to give a shout out to Dr. Minch for developing. There are some things that schools do for all families that are very easy, very efficient to do. And for many families, that is a sufficient amount of communication. That's all they need. If there's a post about a meeting that the school would like to have, the families see that and they show up, and that's great. That's the tier one for family communication. There are some families that maybe might not respond to that overall communication, and you have to do something a little bit more intensive and a little bit more time consuming. So thinking about going into individual neighborhoods, individual communities, doing community focused events like restaurants, popular restaurants in different communities. You might have to identify some community leaders, neighborhood association leaders, and connect with them and get them to help you encourage families or find effective ways of encouraging families to participate in the school activities. Pushing out to community centers is another thing. And then there are some families who, even if you're doing those more intensive things, they still may not engage with the school, right? So that's the very tip of the triangle there. Those are the families where you want to invest your most intensive family outreach, family engagement strategies. So things like personal invitations to events. We once, for one of our focus groups, a principal called a mother of one of the students and personally invited the mother to come to a focus group session. The mother at the time was homeless. She was in a shelter for domestic abuse. But because she got that personal phone call from the principal, she came to that focus group session. So this is something, it's a much more individualized, much more intensive approach, but it can really pay off. Positive home visits are yet another very intensive, very individualized approach to engage families. The thing that I really want you guys to home in on there is that these are positive home visits. I'm not sure how many folks have heard of situations where a school principal, a dean, an assistant principal, a guidance counselor, different educators would ride the bus home with their students and kind of walk the students home and wave, say, hey, mom, hi, hey, dad, and hey, aunt, hey, uncle, and just kind of reach out that way and getting their faces in the neighborhoods. So, and I apologize, I had a little notification go off and that was really disturbing, or distracting rather. At any rate, so positive home visits, thinking about those, keeping those very positive, low key, so that you can establish a history of having positive connections with families that you're having a hard time connecting with. Now, there are situations, we've worked in some locations where the relationships between families, especially families impacted by disproportionate discipline, where those relationships between the families and the school staff were really, really broken. In those situations, what we did is we identified family liaisons or family advocates within the community to help us bridge that first connection with the families we were trying to reach. And there were a couple of different ways we did that. One was looking internally at school staff. So looking for individual teachers, paras, front office staff, cafeteria staff, itinerant staff, anybody who works in the school that had a good relationship with the families we're trying to reach. We recruited them into the effort to get ideas about how to talk to the families, how to connect with the families, or ask them on our behalf, can they reach out to the families and get them to this session? We also kind of broadened that lens and we looked at volunteers in the school building. In one location, there was a volunteer football coach who had a very strong relationship and very, very good feedback and pointers for the school team who was trying to design a focus group about who should be there, who should not be there, things that we absolutely should not say, and things that it would be in our best interest to do to the greatest extent possible. So looking at that volunteer network. If that's not available, then start looking a bit more broadly within your community. Look at your Head Start, your social services organizations. Sometimes there are staff within those organizations that have positive relationships with the families you're trying to reach. There are also community or grassroots organizations and also local churches, right? So we have a community around us. We just need to tap into that community to reach the families we need to reach. Once you've reached them, there are all kinds of opportunities to engage with them. And since you guys have a copy of the slide in the handouts, I'm not going to read it to you, but I can sum it up by saying you can engage with families on just about any element of PBIS. You give them the background information they need, you explain things in very basic terms, and they can be contributing members of your decision-making process. Some examples that we've had here in Florida of family and student collaboration. The first example comes from a high school. This was shortly after the Parkland shooting that we had in Broward County, Florida. If you remember at that time, about a year or so ago, there were a lot of walkouts by students in protest of guns on campus. And so in one of our high schools, there was a group of students who wanted to stage a walkout. The principal connected with those students and wound up doing a little problem solving session on some more productive ways that they can make their voices heard within the school, and they did not have to have that walkout. In another high school, we had a student PBIS team that was an elective in the school. The student PBIS team was in charge of a lot of the data collection and analysis for the Tier 1 PBIS team. They used QR codes to get their peers to respond to specific targeted questions related to PBIS, analyzed the feedback, presented it to the team, and went on with the next question the next month. middle and high school, we've had schools put students in charge of delivering a conference on mental wellness and social emotional skills. And then in several of our districts now, we've had families where we've shared discipline data with families and asked them for ideas on how we can get the message out to additional stakeholders. So managing outreach and feedback can be a bit of a challenge for the Tier 1 PBIS team or for the equity team at your school. And so you want to think about how you can best use not just your team members, but also maybe satellite team members to help you collect information, do the outreach, collect the information, synthesize the information so that the team can make decisions based on the feedback of stakeholders. Um, and so what there is in the handouts, there's a sample implementation schedule and a case study, the first 4 months of implementation after PBIS training, that kind of explains how one PBIS team went about getting information from all of these different groups. And basically is kind of dividing up your Tier 1 PBIS team. This person's in charge of ESE families, reach out and get their input. We have someone else who reaches out to community leaders. And even beyond the Tier 1 PBIS team, looking across your school and seeing, are there certain staff members who can easily reach out to certain key stakeholder groups to get their ideas and feedback on different Tier 1 decisions and discipline policies, right? So kind of thinking about your teaming methods and how to best get information from different groups. Now, different strategies can make this easier for your teams to negotiate. There are multiple online polling platforms now. Nearpod and Padlet are two platforms that I've seen used. You can also turn that feedback solicitation over to your students, right? And have students drive the polling and reporting of data using Google Docs, Google Draw. You could also, kind of a one-way notification, you can have messages delivered through the recorded greeting on your phone answering system. And even you can go very low tech. When people are coming back to schools, you can put some big chart paper up at the entrance to the school with a question for people to respond to, and they can just write their answers on a sticky note and put it up on that sheet of paper. Now, if you have other ideas on strategies that schools can use to get ideas from family members to inform Tier 1 decision making, please go ahead and type those into the chat. Now, if you're having a live event, whether it's face-to-face or virtually a live event, there are certain characteristics of those events that have been shown in the research to promote more equitable collaboration. A lot of these strategies also have been used as a way of reducing individual bias. So we've heard about implicit bias, and we know some folks readily acknowledge that and other folks may not. Having good, positive, authentic collaboration with families and students might be one way of addressing bias. You're also going to be getting information from families and students, straight from the sources that you're trying to support. So if you have a blind spot about certain issues at your school and you're open to hearing it from your stakeholders, they can help you see and uncover issues that are taking place in your school that you just were not tuned into, even if you had the best of intentions going in. So there's a resource in the handout packet, the Student and Family Engagement Inventory. This is where you can just list out the different types of student or family engagement activities that your school uses. And then there are a number of characteristics that you can evaluate each one of those activities against. So for example, if you have an open house activity, does that open house include diverse individuals? Do we have equal status amongst individuals participating in that particular activity? And so you want to attend to things like interpersonal power and social capital, acknowledging that by default, because you're an educator, you do tend to have more power in these interpersonal interactions than family members do coming into the school. That doesn't mean that you're helpless, right? There are things you can do to correct for that. So things like avoiding jargon, using family preferences for communication, explaining things, right? Providing background information that many times educators know, but we don't really think about because we already know it, right? So giving that background information so that families can participate. Um, yep. And then I think the slide kind of says the rest of that. So moving on here. Um, Now, if we're talking about sharing data about disproportionate discipline with families, one thing that can help you in that effort is to first establish a history of safe data sharing. So basically, you just practice sharing information with your families. The information, of course, is de-identified when you share it so that we're still protecting, we're following the FERPA regulations. Um, but basically that just gives you practice. So you can say, hey, these are our most common discipline patterns. What are your guys' thoughts about that? How does that compare? What are your experiences like in terms of discipline, right? So you establish a history of sharing information and you start to establish some norms for getting feedback on the information that you're sharing. The other points here we've already mentioned in terms of having good interpersonal communications. The final point, listening, is probably one of the most important things to take away from all of this. Your focus groups really need to be more of an active listening session for educators, right? The purpose of having a focus group to address disproportionate discipline is to hear from the families who are impacted by that issue. And so if as an educator, you're doing a lot of talking during those focus group sessions, that's a flag that you're off track. Some other characteristics that'll help is keeping the number of participants in your focus group limited. The reason for this is because we all only have a little bit of time that we can devote to any one thing. And when you invite people to a focus group, you want to hear from each individual who's participating, right? You're there to hear their voice. And so if there are 50 people in the room, if you're going to hear from every one of those 50 individuals, you're going to be there for a full day and you're going to lose people in the process, right? So really being selective about who you invite to those focus groups, and I'm going to cover that in the next slide. Looking at the group composition for your focus group. So not only being intentional about who you invite to the focus groups, but also from the school who is facilitating those focus groups. I mentioned the power imbalance that's inherent to school and family communications. So you don't want to have a lot of educators there to begin with. You also want to think about the racial balance of educators to family members. If we're trying to address disproportionate discipline for our Black and African American students, and we have 10 white educators in a room with 12 African American families, they may not feel that comfortable sharing and disclosing their experiences at the school. So it's important for you as you're forming these focus groups to attend to dynamics like that. Keeping an eye on participants' comfort level. When we did our focus groups, we were very deliberate about asking family members, did they want the school principal to sit in on the focus group session, or would they be more comfortable if that person left? More often than not, they wanted the principal there, but I think there was at least one instance where they did not want the administrator there so that they could talk freely. Another really key thing is to be very, very clear in your purpose for pulling that focus group together. You can do a focus group to address any number of issues at your school, and you always get really rich, high quality information from those sessions. But you cannot address a lot of things at once because of the nature of conversations. If you ask a question, people will take it in many, many different directions. So when you bring folks together, you have to do it with a very clear purpose in mind and be very targeted in the information you're asking for. And so that kind of leads to that last point of having a very small number of open-ended questions. There's another resource in the handout packet to help you identify representative focus group participants. This is the tool we used when we were creating focus groups for disproportionate discipline. And so it just kind of walks you through a decision tree about who should come to the table. Like first and foremost, if you're dealing with disproportionate discipline for your Black African American students, then you want to make sure that you're inviting Black African American families to that focus group. If you're a school that has a lot of referrals for Black and African American students, then you want to make sure that several families whose children have received multiple referrals are part of that group. At the same time, you don't only want it to be from that end of your referral distribution. You also want to include some families who have children that have not had discipline issues. They're not going to be the majority of your focus group participants, but it's good to have their voice there so you can get a little bit more balanced picture of their experiences in your school. Thinking about your target group, race, ethnicity, it's just one dimension of culture and identity. And even within Black African American communities, there are sometimes shared characteristics that go beyond just that label of Black African American. So thinking about certain countries, like we have some schools with a very large Haitian population, right? And so if that's the case for your school, then you want to make sure that you're including families that have the characteristics I mentioned before and are also Haitian. If there are families coming from certain neighborhoods or from certain childcare centers, right? Making sure that you're drawing representative families from those centers as much as possible. And then also thinking about things like grade level, academic level, ESE status. If the families have a sibling who attended the school, there are a number of different things that you can consider, and that particular resource will walk you through that decision process, trying to figure out, do you have families that you can pull from to represent all of these different areas? Now, in terms of getting families to attend, family-centered is really the key here. So once you've identified your group, you're going to ask the families that you're inviting to determine the start time, the day of the week. Do they need assistance with childcare? Do they need language assistance? Do they need assistance with transportation to get them to that location? So really, we're designing the session for families, and we're designing the session around family needs. Once they get there, make it comfortable for families to share. So have some food available. That's a great way to connect with others. And it's a little reinforcing for us too. The other thing is to always follow up to remind families to come to the session and confirm that they are still attending. Several of our schools, they would identify about 12 families to participate in the session. The day before, they might find out that one or two families suddenly can't make it. That's okay. They'll find another family or two that they could call to see if they can participate instead. In several of our schools that had the best turnout, we also had follow-up reminders like an hour before the session so that we could prompt folks to come. We even had an SRO at one of our schools offer to get in her car and drive families to the focus group event so that they can get there and lend their voice. Okay. The final point on this slide, developing a script to make sure that your communications are on point and effective. I am a big advocate of that for two reasons. One, I tend to run very nervous, and having a script gives me something so that I know I'm doing what I need to do, right? So it's helpful for me as a facilitator to have like literally a word for word script that I can read to make sure that I'm communicating what I need to communicate. Another good reason to have a script is I have been in focus group sessions where a well-meaning staff member is in there trying to facilitate the session, and they wind up giving the exact opposite message from the one that we're trying to communicate. So for example, we had a dean come in and do one focus group, and the superintendent and assistant superintendents were communicating, we are going to do what it takes to change our systems to make them more equitable. You got to the focus group with the dean, and the dean is like, we're not going to make any big changes. We're just going to maybe slightly tweak a couple of things that we're doing. So tell us what you think. And that was not as effective. So scripts are helpful. Throughout the group, listen, be humble. There's a concept out there known as cultural humility, basically knowing or acknowledging that your values, your beliefs, your perceptions are not the end all be all of truth for all people, right? So having humility going into that session. Transparency is key. It is key because in trying to establish a history of productive collaboration with families, you have to be honest, right? Honest communication is key to having a good relationship. So you have to be transparent. Try to take others' perspectives and use those active listening skills to communicate that you are hearing what people are saying. Um, if you can do just that piece where people are feeling like they are being heard, that by itself can be very healing in terms of building up relationships between family members and school members. So problem solving, focus groups, these are not therapy. We don't intend them to be therapy, but just simply the act of feeling like someone cares about your perceptions and that they're hearing your concerns, like internalizing your concerns, that by itself can promote healing for the folks involved. We asked 4 questions in our family focus groups. We started off by asking how had the schools reached out to them in the past to get ideas about supporting student behavior. Got a lot of nothing when we asked that question. We had an open-ended question that was specific to disproportionate discipline. I'll share with you on the next slide. We also asked families for ideas on how to reduce disproportionate discipline. And then number 4, I think, is a very, very critical piece for addressing equity and discipline outcomes with your family members. And that is, before that group ends, asking families what would they like to see as next steps after that focus group so that they felt confident that the school was taking this issue seriously and actively trying to do something about it. That communication to me is really, really critical, because then as the school, you can step up and you can do that thing and help your families know we are hearing you and we are addressing your concerns. I'll tell you guys, in the vast majority of focus groups, if not all of the focus groups, the thing that people wanted to see was another focus group. So this is great as a new way of work with your families. This is the question that we had for all of our families. We actually used the same question phrased pretty much the same way for all of our different groups. Acknowledging disproportionate discipline is a nationwide issue. We generally share a little bit of data to illustrate that. The schools just started to investigate how that applies in our own backyard. This is what we learned. Our risk ratio is 6.5 and we're horrified. But what we want to know is, how does this data match up to your experience with discipline at our school? And from there, and letting people know they can share their own personal experiences or things they've heard from others. It's all valid. It's a safer way for people to share. But from there, sitting back and listening and taking in what families have to say. With student focus groups, there's a lot of the same characteristics, right? When we had the family focus groups, we generally did those first. And then we asked families, would it be okay if we spoke with your child? And basically did the same thing that we did here today with you. And if so, the family members would sign a permission slip, and then we would figure out the logistics for having student focus groups. We would have to tailor the language a little bit so that it was developmentally appropriate for different students. We would generally start off by asking the students about behavior and discipline at their school, kind of get a general sense of how they perceive things. Actually backing up, we would also have an icebreaker with the students, because they were really not sure why this white lady was pulling them out of class or pulling them out of specials to talk about discipline. That was very weird for many of our students. So having that icebreaker, getting a sense of how they feel about the school, and there are some options listed on the slide for what you could ask them to that extent. Then the next step was very much like our other focus groups, where we shared some national trends in the data and asked for students' perspective. So across the United States, schools are noticing students of color receiving office referrals at higher rates than other students. We want to know how this compares to what's happening at your school. What do you notice? And then again, before you close, getting ideas from your students about what would you like to see as next steps, or what could the school do so that you knew we were taking this feedback seriously. Some other considerations for student focus groups is think about those students' developmental levels, especially at the secondary level. Kids like to gossip. We had a middle school that had started with the family focus groups. We hadn't even had the focus groups yet, but we had done the invitations, and the student walked up to the principal. It was an African-American student, walked up to the white principal, and she told the principal, "I hear you're talking about Black kids." And the principal was a little shocked at first and didn't really know what to do, but very quickly recovered. And the principal said, "Yes, we are. We want to find out better ways to help you guys feel supported and welcome at our school." And the student totally accepted that and kind of thought it was cool. So be prepared for things like that. Also, stay conscious of students' perceptions of authority figures. If you're getting them to share, sometimes you might want to use a staff member who has really good relationships with your students. You might rely on someone kind of externally, maybe one of your community leaders that has good relationships with kids, right? So using your network to help kids feel comfortable disclosing their experiences. Always maintain confidentiality, and this goes for family focus groups as well. Never require participation. People can share as they feel comfortable sharing. Sometimes that means not at all. Some may not even want to be there. They may want to leave immediately. That's okay too. So in the end, I'll wrap this up pretty quickly for folks, just to kind of illustrate our experience since doing these different focus groups. There was some time where we worked with several schools that tried to do problem solving for disproportionate discipline without getting family or student feedback about the problem. And what you see on the green side of the slide here are the different reasons they came up with to explain their disproportionate outcomes, and then the strategies that came out as a result of those potential causes for disparities. So like in that first example, this was disproportionality for African American students. The school team identified, well, we think that African American peers are encouraging bad behavior across one another. And so their intervention strategy was to separate all the African American students so that they have fewer same race peers in the class to encourage bad behavior. Which really hurt my heart when I heard it. So you can see the types of strategies that teams were coming up with, the types of reasons teams were coming up with to explain discipline disparities. A lot of these were very deficit-based, assuming that students had shortcomings in skills, assuming students were overly sensitive. And then a lot of the intervention strategies were aimed at fixing, quote unquote, fixing the students or remedying those perceived deficits. Once we started getting teams to include family and student input, that pretty much flipped completely. The hypotheses, the reasons for discipline disparities really focused on things that the school could control, that the school had direct influence over, things like establishing positive relationships, things like clarifying misunderstandings, having more positive communication instead of just all negative communication with family members. And so the reasons for disparities suddenly became much more actionable. They were also much more respectful of students and families. And then the strategies that schools came up with, they didn't have to do like crazy out of the box things. These were just minor tweaks to what they had already been doing so that their efforts were more targeted to the groups that they needed to reach. If you're curious about what we have on our project to address equity, we are slowly building up that section of our website. If you go to flpbis.org and then other topics, click on equity, that'll take you to another page. And you can scroll down past the information to access the binder with the information. And then you'll see a number of resources that are listed there. But that's all the content I have. We have just a couple minutes left, I think, for questions. So Dr. Minch, if you could help us facilitate that.
No problem. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I just want to thank the presenters. That was an incredible session. Lots of positive feedback in the chat box about the resources that are shared, the conversations happening. They're very appreciative. So great job.
Thank you.
Everyone's sharing great resources. Super session, very helpful.
I see a question about, what methods are people using to get information out to parents who don't use English in the home. Many of the parents I work with do not read any language and are therefore often excluded from surveys. So this again gets to the heart of the access question. So what resources can we provide for these parents? So that's a question that's on deck.
So I would recommend turning to your district, right? And this gets at, when you talk about equity in schools, and you start to unpack the different types of equity and the different problems involved. This is where we start to see how some of the root causes way high up the chain impact what we can do at the school level. So in terms of having interpreters available to help you make those connections, having a family liaison who has the skills necessary to reach out to the families that you're having a hard time connecting with, that becomes critical. You know, I'm an educator and I can barely do English on good days, right? So I would be pretty helpless in those situations. So I would need to turn to my district to get the resources to have someone on my staff who can help me with that aspect. Some of our districts here in Florida have dedicated staff at the district level to assist with that. Now, I think we might have been cut off. I'm not sure.
We've got 3 more minutes. I was just gonna piggyback on that comment. I know my world is a little different from yours because, you know, I'm in mental health world and we're dealing with parents more in a one-to-one situation. However, we service a very diverse area of Chicago. There's over 70 different languages spoken. And recently I had an occasion to work with a client where I had to interface with the school around getting more academic resources from the student. And this student's parents were immigrants from Ghana, or actually from Togo, and they speak a language that's very rare. And CPS, you know, the staff at this particular school, they went the extra mile to set up this meeting, to hunt down an interpreter, and to say, in the future, yeah, we're going to send you these materials, and we understand that your child can read them because she's a high schooler, but we're going to make sure we follow up with an in-person, well, a Zoom meeting with you to walk through this paperwork with you so that you can ask us any questions and you can voice your concerns. So that's going the extra mile. Question for Jennifer: can we get the links Dr. Rose provided on her resource slide? Okay, all right. They're in the PowerPoint. Are we saying that we need to post them on Pathable?
I think that was the question. I said, I passed along your question to you, and then if you want to send them to me or share them, then I can post them in the files pod if you're willing to share or able to share.
Okay, all right, because they're embedded into the PowerPoint slides.
I think they were saying that the links weren't working in the
Oh, okay. All right, then I will do that. I will send them to you, and then can you forward them or post them on the site?
Yeah, I'll add them to the files section.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So on my computer, I'm seeing 117.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think that's the official end. So people can get to that next session.
Okay. All right. It's a pleasure. Hey, Therese,
Definitely.
you're a rock star. Learn stuff every time. Okay.
Likewise. Thank you, Dr. Rose.
Thanks, Devin.
Thank you, Devin.
Great session.
Thank you, Marion, too. Awesome job.
Thank
Bye.
you, guys. Bye-bye.